Hello and welcome back to Read Becca. We're at the last chatty catch-up of 2023. We have this perfect kind of dovetail from the old year into the new year, with ending on a Sunday and starting on a Monday. So I saved filming for when I had kind of wrapped everything up that I wanted to. I'm not one of those people who cares about clearing the decks going into the new year, but I did kind of succeed at doing that, a little unintentionally and partly intentionally. So I have a ton to talk about today in terms of wrapping up everything that I read up to the end of the year. I did start one thing on audio because I didn't have an audio going, but there is no way I will get hardly any progress into it before the new year. So I know I'm not going to finish anything else unless I randomly pick up something super short. And I'm not planning to. So for now, I guess let's start with the graphic works that I finished and catch up on all my reading for the week. So first, I will start with Saga Volume 11. It is a gut-wrenching, heartbreaking series, long-running, obviously, since we're at Volume 11. And I had actually saved this volume for reading on Christmas to kind of gift myself the joy of heartbreaking, because this series, Brian K. Vaughn and Fiona Staples, the illustrator, have truly not protected their readers. They like to do harm to their readers. However, this volume was not very harmful, so happily I didn't cry on Christmas because of this. But it felt like a bridging volume a bit. In this series, we are in a sweeping epic saga, as to the name, following a couple who are kind of a Romeo and Juliet situation in a science fantasy type of story, because we do have full-on magic, but there's planets and space travel, and interplanetary conflict is at the heart of this, because our two main characters, Alana and Marco, are on opposing sides of a planetary war, but they fall in love. And in this volume, we are getting kind of backstory to both of those characters and some more information about them, their past relationships. And we're also delving more into the topic of revenge and vengeance. And that's a big theme throughout this whole series, because Alana and Marco's love has produced a baby at the very, very beginning of the series. That's the starting element of the series. And the whole world is after them to sort of show that you can't have love. And so there has been so much deep vengeance throughout this whole series, both at the personal level and at the grander interplanetary level. But we also get so many quieter moments of just living, just day-to-day life and working to get by, and the struggle that the characters are going through right now. And I can't really reference a whole lot more than that or tell you specifically who I'm talking about, because so much has happened throughout this series. So I'm ready for whatever is coming next. I'm very excited for what comes next, because, as I said, this feels like it's building somewhere. And we are just coming back from a bit of a hiatus with the past two volumes. And we haven't quite built to the heights that we had before, where they were just hitting us hard every time. But it was beautiful, and I have enjoyed so much continuing this series, so I'm happy to be all caught up on it. The next thing that I read was a children's book in Japanese, and I am a goober twice over on this one. I picked this up off the shelf purely because of the art, and it is such lovely art that I was flipping through once I started reading it at home, and realized it feels very familiar. And that's because this is an English book translated into Japanese, and it is by Carle. So they did a great job of, in fact, having both the author, Eriku Karu, I should have recognized that and I didn't, and the translator is Kudo Naoko. Kudo Naoko-san is our translator, and I also didn't recognize the title, because the English title is Animals, Animals. And so that would be something like Dobutsu, no, not Dobutsu, Dobutsu. And it's not. They translated it as something like Mina iketeru, Mina de iketeru, which I think is going for the vibe of like an expansive amount of living things. But what it more really directly is everybody's alive, everybody's alive. So translation is hard. This was lovely art. I really enjoyed it for the art, but as far as an actual reading experience, this was tough, because this was way past my actual reading level in Japanese. I have been very cautious to pick up things that are in hiragana, because they are at my reading level. They often are for people who haven't learned a lot of complex sentence structure yet. However, this is animal art put to poetry by other people with Eric Carle's illustrations, and I don't know the sentence structure well enough and hadn't realized when I picked this up that a lot of it is in kanji, and that reading level is something a little bit further along where someone already has a very good grasp of sentence structure, and I don't. So it does helpfully have the furigana or ruby above the kanji, so that was nice. So I was able to read it phonetically, but I really was not able to read very much of this as far as getting content out of it. So this is one I would really like to pick up again sometime later when I am more at that reading level. Then let's jump into the print books. Let's start with the one that I finished last. So I just finished this today. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness was on my physical TBR shelf. I had tried this a couple of years ago in audio and abandoned it, despite it being very, very short. This is tiny. It has an abundance of the N-word and very jarring imagery throughout, so that was why I couldn't take it on audio. It was too much for me. So I got this in print at a cheap charity sale, and so I was like, I want to try this. This is a massive classic. This is a book that was written by Joseph Conrad and has maybe some self-inspired elements, but is a fictional account of a man, Marlowe, going to the Congo under Belgian colonial rule, and him seeing a lot of what's going on there, but having this drive to kind of, you know, the Western man's drive to be empowered and plow through this primitive area. And so he's going there to become a steamship operator, basically. And he feels that's going to give him some status and power. And he acts like that, but I don't feel like he ever actually had that status and power. He monologues an awful lot. So this was not a great experience. I don't regret reading it. This is, as I said, a big classic that comes up often. It was written in the very, very end of the 1800s and was a noteworthy work at the time. But this was a slog to get through because of those attitudes, because of the depictions of the people. As he's traveling, we get some very strong expeditionary vibes. So a lot of what happened here during those times reminded me very much of reading River of Gods earlier this year. And that was much more palatable because of the framing that we were in. Whereas here, like, he's actually very much for these things most of the time, I think. Or not necessarily for them. He is depicting things that are horrors as horrors, but quite often, just the way he's looking at people of color and women are just terrible. The depictions are really rough. However, that's balanced against some really incredibly lovely prose at moments describing what they're moving through in the world and the experiences and the things he's feeling. Really beautiful. But then we come back to just these really repugnant, ignorant, boorish dudes that I really didn't like. So there wasn't really a lot redeemable about what this was trying to get across that I could find, because it ended so abruptly for me. Like he is driving toward this status that he's seeking, and he is so full of himself, so arrogant all the way till the end, and he doesn't seem to learn anything or grow in any way, even though something does kind of happen that's major and should knock him down a peg, I think. At the end, it really doesn't. So I don't feel like there was any growth or any learning out of his story. So I'm glad to have read it finally. But you know, it was okay. It was a disappointment, I guess, in the aspect of I only like the prose, really. And that was short, so I knew I would be able to get off of my TBR shelf going into tomorrow when I'm going to set my 2024 TBR. So that was kind of the goal. Next, let's talk about the romance book. So holiday romance, I had Once Upon a December by Amy E. Reichert. This was okay. It was kind of a disappointment as well, but it was a good time. It was about what you expect from a very cheesy holiday rom-com. This is a take on Brigadoon. So we have a character, Astra Snow Noel, who she is not the magical one though, oddly enough. She is a normal citizen who goes to the holiday market in Milwaukee every year. And on the other side, we have Jack Clausen, who is one of the brothers at a Kringle bakery in a magical holiday market called the Yule Market that attaches itself to different holiday markets around the world. And the weird timiness of that never worked out for me, but more or less they exist only during the month of December, and they only appear on certain days, and for whatever reason, there is a timey-wimey element. They age somewhat differently. So he has been seeing her for years and has sort of slowly fallen in love with her over those years where she shows up. But no one who goes to the Yule Market from outside ever remembers it after the day that they're there. So she has no idea. But he's been building things up. And we start with him having built to, I think I'm going to do a thing, make this special thing for her that I know she loves and will be perfect. And he's trying to create this relationship with her after years. And that time aspect, I didn't love. That was one of the many things that really kind of got to me, was that he met her as a teenager, when she was a teenager and he was an adult. And of course the time working differently, you kind of have to account for that, or okay, whatever, but I just didn't like it. He obviously waits, she gets married, and he sticks with it even through that, and then she gets divorced, and all of this has been happening over her life. And then finally, at the beginning of this novel, she's in her late 30s and dealing with an ex who is kind of vindictive and sharing custody of a dog, and she thinks she's alone forever. And that's finally the point where she does remember. And so she starts this wild journey of trying to figure out, well, what the heck is this jewel market, and how do I get back there? Because she absolutely must. She's having dreams about it, basically. And I wanted that sort of pursuit to be a bigger element, and it really wasn't. It feels like that just kind of fell together. It definitely had holiday winter vibes, and it took place over multiple Christmases. So I did kind of like that it wasn't just this instantaneous thing. But I really didn't like our main character, Astra, because she, on the outside world, feels very entitled, and she seems to feel like, everything has to work for her, otherwise it's wrong. and kind of spoiler, I guess, in the end, everything wraps up, very tidily, as a holiday rom-com would. But it left me unsatisfied because basically everyone else has to give things up and she doesn't. And it was she always kind of gets her way. Earlier in the book, to her divorce, one of the things she is griping about is, having to share her dog with this guy, and how she's always going to be alone and never have children. But it's heavily implied that she wanted children and her husband never did. So how did you end up in that relationship? So I kind of was immediately didn't want to be on her side with that, because she had put herself in that bad situation, and she constantly was trying to finagle things to favor her throughout her life, and I just really didn't like that. So if this were a movie, a holiday rom-com film that, I spent an hour and a half on or whatever, I probably would have been fine with overlooking all of that. But investing, probably 4 to 6 hours in reading this and wanting to be invested in the characters, and then having her do all these dumb, unlikable things, yeah, I was very frustrated with that. But I did enjoy it. It was a cheesy rom-com. It was okay for the season. And I did like generally the concept of this rendition of a holiday Brigadoon type story. So I'm a huge fan of Brigadoon. So it was okay. And the next one was also okay, but better, on the better end of okay. It was Codename Charming by Lucy Parker. This is the second in not the London Celebrities, something Royals, I can't remember. This is the follow-up to Battle Royal. But this one is a very big departure because we don't have the baking elements, and I loved the baking elements of Battle Royal. I read that in November. This one just came out as well. This came out this year. So this one we are following Petunia, who is a personal assistant to a prince and his royal bodyguard, Matthias. And it's another, much like Battle Royal, a grumpy sunshine romance. And this series also appears to be making the grumpy guy is also a cat dad, is now the consistent thing of the series. So I just love that. It also has forced proximity almost to the point of fake dating, and that was also in the previous book as well. So I think those are the main tropes that this series is using. If you're a romance reader, you know what that means. But if you're not, it doesn't matter. So Petunia and Matthias, they repeatedly have been sort of thrown together multiple times due to mishaps surrounding their jobs. And there is no suggestion really between them of romance, especially Matthias is very, hardened and stoic about his job. He's a typical bodyguard. But there is a paparazzi problem where effectively people are seeing her with the prince and acting like there might be something romantic there. So, to throw the paparazzis off the scent, of course, they have to redirect by pretending that Petunia and Matthias are a thing. So they're, everyone is like, well, you could just, stand close to each other, maybe make eyes, spend a little more time together, be publicly visible together. And of course, that turns into them starting to build a real relationship. And I love that setup. That's a great setup. What this didn't deliver on, I think, for me, is that, number one, it took too long to get through just the foibles of them having the mishaps before we get to that. So that could have all been preamble. I don't feel like we needed so much of that on the page. So that took like 50 pages before we're finally to, okay, you guys need to start being closer to each other. And then there is also a whole mystery subplot where Petunia has a mystery from her past that she starts trying to unravel. And that should have been like the main plot after the romance. And instead it's very much background subplot. The main plot is just them, fumbling around, going out, trying to be visible to the paparazzi. So it's like the paparazzi part is the main plot of the story. And I felt like that wasn't really needed. That could have been the background subplot. So I didn't really love that. But the character building here was still great. And that's what I really enjoy about Lucy Parker. Like, she knows how to deliver characters that you're genuinely going to connect with, and they felt believable. Petunia, we knew some of her background from the previous book a little bit. She was a secondary character there, but she certainly has had a neglectful and emotionally abusive upbringing, and that plays into her character so much. And then Matthias, we find out, was orphaned and through the foster system. And he has a lot of baggage from that. So they both have loads of baggage that is playing into how they have approached relationships in their adult life. I love their dynamic as individuals, and how people from outside approach them, because they initially have kind of misgivings about each other. And to the grumpy sunshine aspect, they also outwardly are that way because she's very, very petite and tiny, and he is this big brooding guy who's kind of scary. People approach him, and they're nicknamed a bit a Beauty and the Beast through the paparazzi approach to them, because he has scars on his face through the line of his job. He's broken his nose lots of times. He's depicted quite differently here. He's got a beard in the book and is somewhat balding. So he is a gruff and a little bit scary looking guy, and she's this tiny, petite little lady. So they have this great, very different dynamic with each other, and the grumpy sunshine is really played out through that. So I think it was well executed in general, but it didn't quite live up to how much I loved Battle Royal. It was an enjoyable romance to read, though, and I definitely will continue on with the series, and I very much need to get back to her London Celebrities series as well. Then I read a mystery. I read Waste of a Life by Simon Brett. This is the third in the Decluttering mystery series. And Simon Brett is a TV writer. So this series, while short, is very cinematic and feels like something that you would see on a mystery series show. This is also bordering a little bit on like cozy mystery, but not quite, because we do have definite like darker and death elements on the page, but so much of it is about our main character's life and just her day-to-day job as a declutterer. So each of these books, for me, has spent a lot of time on recapping and bringing us up to speed, so you can read these in any order. This is the latest that's out, but I am assuming that it will probably continue on as an ongoing series. There's not a larger plot arc as far as I can tell. So in this one, Ellen, our declutterer, has taken on a new client who was more or less agoraphobic, it seems like. And as a condition of some, he went to the hospital and then got out and was offered to partner with a declutterer rather than getting involved with like social services. And so he's going through that process, and then he winds up dead. So that's the murder mystery at the core of this. But we also are seeing Ellen go about her day-to-day business with her regular clients. She is having some major personal drama in her life too. To the previous book, we had something involving her personal life that was very major and very mental healthy. And in this one, we're also having something very major and very mental healthy with someone else in her life. And so I would say, like, that's what for me crosses the line outside of the cozy vibe, because this does contain some pretty severe mental health issues. In her backstory, her husband took his own life, and that is prominent through all three books. So you should be aware of that this does contain a lot of really heavy stuff in that regard. So I don't feel like this is substantial enough to tackle some of the things that it did tackle, though. I think the mystery aspect of it was really well handled, and it was compelling. Like, it was nonstop through this with these little bursts of her just going about her day, and she does always seem to kind of conveniently come across the information that she needs, but I feel like this one went more toward realism in that aspect than the previous one, where I had some critiques about how convenient it was for her. Here she got some pushback on things that she wanted information for, and she didn't get it because it wouldn't have been normal for that to happen. So I think that worked out well. I think this continues to bother me a little bit in how it's handling alcoholism, because that is a prominent topic. I am feeling like we have to be heading toward that getting addressed somewhere in a future book. So I'm assuming that's on plan and that is actually working towards something, but so far alcoholism is also a prominent element of this series, and for my liking is not being handled with a lot of nuance. So I enjoyed reading it though, and I have enjoyed this whole series. It wasn't really a standout, but it is very entertaining. Next I finished Paladin of Souls by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is the second book in the World of the Five Gods fantasy series. This is high fantasy with soft magic and a lot of courtly drama, but this is not a continuous series. This novel kind of stands on its own. It takes place a couple years after the previous book, Curse of Chalian, and it follows a new character. But I don't know that you would want to start with this. You certainly could, and you would get an enjoyable story. But there's a lot of things like world building that's established in the first book, and I think attachment to the character and getting attached to this world happens much more in the first book. So I would recommend starting with Curse of Chalian. But in this book we are following Ista, who is the Dowager Reina, which is kind of like a queen mother, I guess. She's older, she's middle-aged, and she is very unconventional. So because of things we know from the previous book, she kind of was sitting around at court, and now she had reasons for that. But now she's free to do what she wants, and she kind of just wants to go on an adventure. And so she acquires herself an also unusual handmaiden and kind of goes off on the road. Everyone is very much against this, of course. And I don't know how old she is exactly. I don't think it ever says, but I'm placing her as kind of like around 50-ish. She certainly has adult children at this point. But she's older, but not like super elderly. But she is a total spitfire. And as she sets off on this journey, there's some weird things start popping up. Probably the main weird thing, like the start of the real weirdness, is a demon ferret. I love that. There is humor throughout this. I don't know whether the demon ferret was specifically supposed to be humorous, but it was humorous to me. So there's such heart and charm to this story and the characterization throughout. Our character Ista, for me, is very much like Olenna Tyrell, maybe a younger version of, like slightly younger version of her, where she's the Thorn of Highgarden in Game of Thrones, if you know who I'm talking about, where she's a little bit sharper and a little bit more cunning than other people are, and she's also not afraid to speak her mind, and she's just very unconventional, and that's how Ista is here. So as a result of not just the demon ferret, but other mishaps along the way, she winds up in a castle of a minor court. And that's really, for me, where the story kicked off. Before that, it felt very meandering, and I was having trouble getting into it as much, which is why I really recommend starting with the first book. Because, like, I was like, I know this is going to go somewhere and get there, but it's just not. Once we finally get to the minor court, that's where things kicked off, and we were into the courtly drama. There is conflict between this court and another. So there's kind of bigger scale drama that's like real world drama, but there's also sort of mystical, spiritual, magical drama with whatever this demon problem is that's happening, and interpersonal drama at court. There's a lot of that. I love that. There's so much conniving and backstabbing throughout this, and so much maneuvering. And Izza's coming in from outside without really an idea of who the key players in this court are. And so that dynamic is really great because she's so smart and she's so cunning. Like, she's able to maneuver, and we do get her introspection, so we see her inside thinking through what's going on, and it's just perfect. So I love that aspect. Like, I love courtly drama, and as I said, this is soft fantasy, so there is a lot of stuff that's going on that's magical, but we don't ever get like info dumps into how it's happening or why it's happening. But yeah, this is a great example of where that can be done in a high fantasy with a lot of internal consistency. So it doesn't ever feel like it's just hand wavy to be there to make things magical. It feels like it matters. This is also a world, as a result of being the world of the five gods, where there are gods. They are tangible, and they're kind of like the Greek or Roman gods, where they're present, but they're never there when you want them or need them, and they kind of meddle in humans' lives. And so Ista is sometimes contacted by one of these gods, who is a bit of a trickster. And that aspect, I think, is my favorite of this whole thing. It's like that dynamic between her. She feels like she's got a handle on things, and then this god will sort of show up just to her to upset things a little bit, or make clear something to her that really changes her perception. So it is just such a wonderful aspect of storytelling in how Bujold has made this such a dynamic world, has created all of these magical elements that feel very tangible. Reading through this, major parts of this, I was like feeling like it was a historical fiction novel, and then all of a sudden you would have a god pop up. And it's like, what? Whoa, yeah, this is fantasy. Whoops, I forgot. Because this feels like it could be at a real world court. This was just such a wonderful story that captured both the intimate. It has a minor romance, and I think this won awards for that romance, for like being a romance in a non-romance novel. For whatever reason, it's not super prominent, and there also was a very non-prominent romance in the first book that's basically just secretive glances, and that's all. But they're very sweet romances that you really get behind and get invested in hoping that their romance will play out. Same deal here. But that happening, the individual and introspective stakes, and then the big stakes of what this magical problem is, of the conflicts between castles, and like all the stakes are so grand, and yet we're very focused on character. And I think Bujold is just a master of character, for sure. So this has continued on my reading. I have the third book to get to, and then I think a load of novellas in this world. So I'm charmed, and I definitely plan to continue on with that one. And finally, I have my audiobook, which I finished, Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey, to finish off for the year my reading project of reading all of Sarah Gailey's backlist. So I'm caught up on their backlist. I have read all of the books they have out, and that is both joyful and sad because I have no more books to get to of their work. Gailey is certainly an author I will be watching out for, because especially with this entry, I think this might be my favorite of their work. But this is, I'm not sure whether to call it a gothic or a haunted house story. For me, like it technically ticks all the boxes of a gothic story, but it feels more like a haunted house story. So it's a contemporary novel that is certainly in the horror genre. It has very little graphic violence, almost none in fact. But we are following adult Vera as she is returning to her childhood home to care for her mother who is dying. And so she shows up there, and immediately we know that things are not great in her home, that her relationship with her mother is really strained and very toxic. But she's there to get things done, and she's cleaning out the house. And as we're going along, we're also getting these flashes back to her childhood and revealing the relationship she had with her mother and her father, and how different those were, but that they were both so unhealthy in completely different ways. And I can't say too much because this book is a horror and it's very slow moving. So I don't want to talk about plot more than that, but I think we quickly learn that there was something went wrong in their house, and it has become famous. Somebody has written about their house, and is it haunted? Is it something real world that was written about? So we don't have the full picture, and that plays out very, very slowly. But for me, the pacing of this, like, I have to give this 5 stars just for pacing, because the pacing was so impeccable. Gailey is setting up tension and slowly building it and then releasing it. And then you're just in a mundane moment and you're like, oh, okay, well, that, I guess we're fine now, yeah. And then starts building the tension again. And every time it's because Gailey has really delivered on something that was set up. And so you are constantly getting these deliveries of not twists, but reveals, certainly throughout the whole book. And that feels so satisfying to read. So the pacing is just 5 stars. It's perfect. This is impeccable masterclass on how to pace a horror novel. The reveals were so satisfying. Like, they were not unpredictable things, I think. I think every time she is uncovering something about her past, Vera, as we are, that she maybe didn't remember, or maybe she did remember, and that's even worse. And as a reader, we're questioning, which is it? Yeah, I was just enamored with this book, start to finish. It was so good. It captured this vibe of the spooky house. It gave us a character who we could get behind, but we know that there's something really wrong in her backstory that we're working to uncover. There is just so much here that Gailey has also explored in other novels about trauma, the cycle of trauma, and how our families, how our parents build us in our home as individuals, like how they set the tone for our whole life. I think there was so much said there and so much messaging to this that it's not just a horror novel. It really has kind of social commentary and personal commentary. And I always love that about Gailey's work, because they always are incorporating so many different messages they want to get across. And they're woven into the storytelling so well every time. And that's why Gailey is an auto-read author that I wanted to read everything from. So I'm a little heartbroken to be done, because I think right now, Just Like Home is now my favorite of their work. It feels like this was just a beautifully executed novel. It felt like the right length. It felt like the characterization. Every character leapt off the page or the audiobook. It was so alive, and I felt tangibly there. There were so many moments of tension. And from a prose standpoint, the prose was really gorgeous. I think this is the first of Gailey's work where the prose has actually jumped out at me as, like, in these moments that weren't necessarily eerie, Gailey is unspooling something out in front of us in the prose. And it just was so beautiful. I just wanted to reread passages. And so I think this is probably a book I will be getting in print eventually, once I'm caught up on my 24 and 24 reading. Because I do want to reread it. I want to reread it in print and really meditate over some of the passages, because they were just so hauntingly written. So I think that's it for books for today. And excitingly, so these 4 are going back to the library. Those are the end of my physical library books. And these 2 were from my TBR, so those are gonna get pulled off tomorrow and make space for more. So that's really exciting. I do have one last book that I started, and that is How High We Go in the Dark on audio. And I, of course, am not going to finish that. I didn't even get far enough to have an initial impression about it, but very heartbreaking. That was one of the things I wanted to get wrapped up before the end of the year as a way of finishing off the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize from 2022 before I started to 2023's selections. So I didn't finish it in time for the new year, but I'm sure I will finish it off probably in the next week. It will not be a big difficulty to do so. So I think that's it for the reading stuff. In terms of what I watched this week, I mostly watched reality shows, holiday reality shows, and I did finish one more holiday movie. I watched Something from Tiffany's, which I did like very much. I think that was on Prime, and it's a contemporary and in New York. And a guy is going to Tiffany's to get a ring for his girlfriend, soon to be fiance, and there's a mix-up because another guy comes in looking for whatever's cheapest, basically, to win over his girlfriend a little bit, or to appease his girlfriend, it sounds like. And he gets hit by a car outside, and then the other guy comes to help him and sets down his bag, and their 2 bags get swapped. And so a mishap occurs between them, and the guy who wanted the cheap item ends up giving a ring to his girlfriend, who is a baker and is played by Zoe Deutsch, who's very, very sweet. So it's got that comedic element, but I felt like this was actually a really well-developed and well-written movie. It felt like a little bit above a typical holiday rom-com. There was actually some serious nuance to them having baggage with both of their individual partners, but I'm not sure I loved that they kind of wound up through this mishap getting connected with one another and sort of flirting while they're still in relationships, realizing that those relationships are bad, obviously, but only after they've already kind of been seeing each other casually a bit. I'm not sure I loved that. However, I did feel like this was a really smart, well-written, well-performed movie, and it was a charming holiday film. I liked that it went from basically before Christmas one year all the way through that Christmas and New Year's, and then to the following Christmas. So it was great for this in-between period when we were kind of focusing on both holidays. So I thought that was overall an enjoyable one. It wasn't a massive standout, but good. I think that's about it as far as my week. As I said, very, very quiet week at work. Normally I get about 300 to 500 emails a day, and I was maybe getting 10% of that. So I was coming in and not having anything I had to do. So just kind of keeping an ear out for anybody messaging me, and that was about it, or emails coming in, and reading or doing other stuff. I finished the bookshelves. That was the big time-consuming thing this week that I futzed with them a lot. Finished clearing up everything except for little tiny, like the knickknacks are still not all out. But everything is back where it should be, and that feels very, very good. We did finally hit winter a little bit. It snowed, yay. What's happening out there? Huh, Ripley? Is that your favorite television when it snows? But nothing stuck, which is also a yay for me. I like the snow coming down and being cozy, but not preventing us from going anywhere. And it has been cold, so we are finally getting some wintry cozy vibes, which has been very good for reading. I think that's why I read so much this week. Preparing for the new year, and I have been kind of doing that. So as far as videos that are upcoming, I have a couple weeks probably worth of stuff filmed. I've got a handful of filmed videos, a haul, a tour of the bookshelves rapidly, and a review. And then tomorrow, when I set my 2024 TBR shelf, I'll do a video just showing every book on the shelf now for my TBR, but that will be very easy. So I have all of that kind of backlogged and ready to go with some editing. So for the next 2 weeks, you'll probably be getting those pre-filmed videos and my weekly check-ins as usual. But I will be spending those couple weeks with the break in filming mostly to do all my end of year wrap up stuff. So the goals catch up, the favorites of the year. I've loosely got a couple in mind, but I really need to spend some time looking at those. So that's going to be my next couple weeks focus on. My booktube time is going to be researching, putting together my lists. So I will probably get those out mid-month rather than right away in the first couple weeks. So I think that is it for me. I'm so excited for the new year. I picked up my new day planner. It was so frustrating. I think last year I went early January and I barely got one. They had a handful to pick from though. This year I went to grab one earlier this week, and they were down to only 3 types of day planners left. So really slim pickings at this point already, and we haven't even hit the new year. So I didn't manage to get a cheap smoke-in clearance deal even, but I do have it, so I'm ready to start whatever I read tomorrow and get logged into my day planner. And I think that's it for me. I hope you have a wonderful New Year's Eve and a happy New Year. If you are celebrating, be safe, please. And if you are not, enjoy your night at home and read a lot. And here's to looking forward to a beautiful and wonderful reading year in 2024. Thank you all so very much for watching.